still remember the first time I saw her. Anna. It was my freshman year of college, and I was still getting used to the idea of being away from home. I just grabbed a coffee from the campus cafe, fumbling with my notebook and bag, when I bumped into someone. Hard. Coffee spilled, papers went flying, and I was ready to mutter an apology and retreat. But then I looked up, and there she was. Anna laughed, a warm, melodic sound that somehow made me feel less like a klutz. "You've got good aim," she said, smiling as she handed me one of my soaked papers. "But maybe try aiming for the trash can next time instead of people." Her humor caught me off guard, and for a second, I just stood there staring at her. She was striking not in a flashy way, but in the kind of way that you don't notice until you're already staring too long. Her dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, a few loose strands framing her face, and her eyes, big, brown, and full of life, seemed to carry 1,000 little stories. I stammered out something that I hoped sounded like an apology, and she grinned again. "Don't worry about it," she said. "Happens to the best of us." Before I knew it, we were chatting like old friends. Turns out, we were both new to campus and trying to find our footing. She was a dance major, an incredible one, as I'd later find out, and I was studying business with no clue what I wanted to do with it. By the end of that conversation, I had her number saved in my phone under Anna, Coffee Target. Felt like a small victory. What started as a casual friendship quickly turned into something more. Anna had this way of making everything feel lighter. She was kind, funny, and ridiculously talented. I went to one of her dance performances a few weeks after we met, and I was blown away. Watching her move on stage was like seeing another side of her, a confident, almost ethereal version of the girl I'd spilled coffee on. She'd caught me staring, and afterward, she teased me mercilessly about it. "You looked like you were watching a unicorn," she joked, nudging me as we walked back to campus. "Well, it's not every day you see a unicorn perform a perfect pirouette." I shot back, and she laughed. This full, genuine laugh that made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. By the time our first semester ended, we were officially dating. It wasn't a big, dramatic moment, just a quiet realization that we both wanted the same thing. We started spending more time together, studying in the library, grabbing late-night snacks, and even tackling my lack of rhythm during her attempts to teach me basic dance steps. Spoiler alert, I was hopeless. "What am I supposed to do with these two left feet?" she'd say, throwing her hands up in mock exasperation as I stumbled over yet another move. But she never gave up on me, and somehow, those moments became some of my favorite memories. Anna wasn't just my girlfriend. She became my best friend. She had this way of making even the most mundane things feel special. Grocery shopping turned into an adventure, complete with bad impressions of the store's intercom voice. Road trips were filled with off-key singing and her expert navigation skills, which occasionally got us lost but always led to an unexpected story. We met each other's families after about a year, and it felt like everything just fit. My mom adored Anna, constantly gushing about how sweet and talented she was. And her parents? They treated me like family from the start. Her dad even jokingly asked when we were getting married the first time we met. Life was good, perfect, even, or at least that's what I thought at the time. 2 months into our relationship, Anna and I decided to take what felt like a natural next step, moving in together. Looking back, it might have seemed fast to some people, but for us, it just felt right. Spending time apart was getting harder by the day, and since both of us were still paying for separate dorm rooms that neither of us were actually living in, splitting a rented apartment seemed like a win-win. We found a small 2-bedroom place not too far from campus. It wasn't much. Creaky floors, an ancient oven that needed a good kick to work, and a view of a brick wall from the bedroom window, but it was ours. I remember how excited we were the day we signed the lease, lugging our mismatched furniture and bargain bin dishes into the place like it was a palace. We spent the first night sitting on the floor, eating pizza straight from the box, surrounded by unpacked boxes and laughing about how grown-up we felt. Anna turned to me at one point, a playful glint in her eyes. "So, do we keep the second bedroom as a guest room or turn it into your dance studio?" I laughed. "I think the guest room is safe for now. Unless you think your choreography could use a guy with 2 left feet. She threw a balled-up napkin at me and grinned. Don't tempt me. Life in that little apartment felt like the start of something big. We were still getting to know each other in ways you only do when you share the same space. Her habit of singing in the shower, my tendency to leave socks everywhere. There were occasional disagreements, sure, like whose turn it was to do the dishes or which side of the bed was better. But they always ended in laughter or compromise, leaving us feeling closer than before. Meeting Anna's parents came not long after we moved in. I was nervous, really nervous. I'd heard enough horror stories about intimidating dads and judgmental moms to brace myself for the worst. But the reality was nothing like that. We visited her family on a Saturday afternoon. They lived in a cozy suburban house, the kind with a white picket fence and flower beds that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Anna's mom, a warm, soft-spoken woman with the same kind eyes as her daughter, greeted us at the door with a hug and a tray of cookies fresh out of the oven. "So, this is the boy who's stolen my daughter's heart," she said, her smile making me feel instantly at ease. Her dad was a bit more reserved at first. He had this way of looking at me, like he was trying to figure me out. But as we sat down for dinner, his walls came down. We bonded over a shared love of baseball, and by the end of the meal, he was cracking jokes and calling me by a nickname. At one point, he clapped me on the back and said, "You know, I like you, kid. You've got a good head on your shoulders." Anna's mom nodded in agreement. "You make her happy. That's all we could ever ask for." The evening ended with us sitting around the living room, flipping through old photo albums of Anna as a kid. Her in a tutu at her first dance recital. Her grinning with a missing tooth in a school photo. She was embarrassed, of course, but I loved it. It made me feel even closer to her, like I was getting to know the pieces of her life that had shaped the woman I'd fallen for. Our relationship, our little apartment, her welcoming family. It all felt perfect. We were building a life together, one filled with late-night talks, lazy Sundays, and dreams about the future. A few months after moving in together, Anna and I decided it was time to add to our little household. We weren't ready for anything big, like a house or kids, but we both felt like something was missing. It was Anna who first brought it up during one of our lazy Sunday mornings. We were sprawled on the couch, the sunlight streaming through the windows, her head resting on my chest as we scrolled aimlessly through our phones. She turned to me, her face lit with that familiar spark of excitement that meant she had an idea. "Let's get a dog," she said, sitting up suddenly. I blinked, caught off guard. "A dog? Like an actual dog? You know those aren't as easy as houseplants, right?" She rolled her eyes, swatting my arm. "Of course, I know that. But think about it. We've got the space, we're both home enough to take care of one, and I've always wanted a dog. Haven't you?" I couldn't argue with that. I'd grown up with dogs and missed having one around. But I played it cool, pretending to weigh the pros and cons while Anna tried to convince me. "Think about it," she said, her hands animated. "Walks in the park, cuddles on the couch, and they're supposed to be great stress relievers. Plus, who doesn't love puppy kisses?" Her enthusiasm was contagious, and before I knew it, we were looking up adoption centers nearby. The next weekend, we visited a local animal shelter. Walking in, the sound of barking and the smell of kibble hit us immediately. Anna's eyes lit up as we passed rows of kennels, each filled with dogs of all shapes and sizes. There were big dogs, small dogs, old dogs, and puppies tumbling over each other. Then we saw her. In the corner of one kennel was a tiny ball of white fluff with the biggest, roundest eyes I'd ever seen. She looked up at us, wagging her tail so hard her whole body wiggled. Anna gasped, "That's her. That's our dog." We asked to volunteer about her and learned her name was Daisy, a 2-month-old Maltese mix who had been brought in with her siblings. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. She was the runt of the litter, but what she lacked in size, she made up for in personality. When they let us into the kennel to meet her, she came bounding over, jumping into Anna's lap as if she already knew she belonged to us. Anna laughed, scratching behind Daisy's ears as the puppy licked her face. "She's perfect," Anna said, looking up at me with a smile that made my chest ache. "Don't you think?" I nodded. Yeah, she's perfect. Daisy settled into our home like she'd always been there. She quickly became the center of our little world. We bought her a tiny bed, which she almost never used because she preferred sleeping at the foot of ours. Her toys were scattered across the apartment, and her leash hung by the door, ready for our daily walks. Those walks became one of my favorite parts of the day. Watching Daisy bounce along the sidewalk, her tail wagging like a tiny metronome, was an instant mood booster. Anna loved taking her to the park, where Daisy would chase squirrels and charm every passerby with her big puppy eyes. At night, we'd sit on the couch, Daisy curled up between us, snoring softly. Anna would rest her head on my shoulder, and I'd think about how lucky I was. Our little family, me, Anna, and Daisy, it felt like everything I'd ever wanted. Daisy brought us closer in so many ways. She taught us patience during those early days of potty training. She gave us reasons to laugh when she stole socks or got stuck under the coffee table. And most of all, she reminded us of the simple joys in life, like how exciting a stick can be or how comforting it is to have someone waiting for you at the door. For a while, it felt like nothing could touch us. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, doesn't it? The summer before our senior year of university was supposed to be a carefree stretch of lazy mornings and days filled with plans for the future. Instead, it became one of the most pivotal and emotionally complex times in our lives. Started with a phone call. Anna's uncle, a man she'd always spoken of with great fondness, had passed away unexpectedly. He was her mother's older brother and, from what I'd gathered over the years, had been a constant source of support for her family. He'd never married or had kids of his own, which made Anna one of the closest people in his life. I'll never forget the way she broke down when she got the news. We were sitting on the couch with Daisy snoozing between us when her phone rang. At first, she just listened, her face going pale, and then the tears came, quiet at first before the dam broke entirely. I held her as tightly as I could, whispering words of comfort that I wasn't sure would help. The weeks that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements, family gatherings, and raw grief. Anna was different during that time, quieter, more withdrawn. She didn't smile as easily, and even Daisy's antics, which usually brought her so much joy, barely earned a reaction. Then came the surprise. A few days after the funeral, Anna's family gathered to hear the reading of her uncle's will. It turned out he had left her his apartment. It was a small, one-bedroom unit in a quiet part of the city, nothing fancy, but it was hers. Anna was stunned, and so was I. At first, she wasn't sure if she wanted it. "It doesn't feel right," she said one night as we sat on the floor of our rented apartment, boxes half-packed around us. "I loved him so much, but moving in there feels final, like he's really gone." I told her we didn't have to do anything she wasn't ready for. But after a few days of thinking it over, she decided to honor his memory by making the apartment our new home. Moving day was bittersweet. We packed up our little two-bedroom place and drove to the apartment her uncle had called home. Walking in for the first time felt heavy. The air was thick with memories we didn't share, and Anna seemed lost in thought as she wandered from room to room. "This was his favorite chair," she said softly, running her fingers over the armrest of a worn recliner. "He'd sit here and read every night." We spent the next few weeks trying to make the apartment ours. We painted the walls, rearranged furniture, and slowly replaced some of the older pieces with things that felt more like us. But no matter what we did, it was clear that this transition was harder on Anna than she let on. When the fall semester started, Anna wasn't ready. She missed the first few weeks of university, something completely out of character for her. She was always the type to have her books ordered early and her planner filled with color-coded schedules. I tried to support her the best I could. I handled as many errands as possible, took Daisy on longer walks so Anna could have some quiet time, and encouraged her to talk about her uncle whenever she wanted. But nothing seemed to pull her out of the fog she was in. One night, I found her sitting on the floor of the apartment, flipping through an old photo album she'd found in one of her uncle's boxes. She looked up at me, her eyes glassy. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to move on." I sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. You don't have to figure it out all at once, I said. Take it one day at a time. And when you're ready, I'll be right here. Slowly but surely, she started to come back to herself. She returned to classes, catching up on everything she'd missed with the kind of determination I'd always admired in her. She poured herself into her dance rehearsals, channeling her emotions into every step. By the end of the semester, she seemed almost like the Anna I'd fallen in love with, cheerful, kind, and full of life. But there were moments when I'd catch her staring out the window or holding one of her uncle's books, and I knew she was still carrying that loss with her. The apartment became our home, a mix of her uncle's old things and our new beginnings. Daisy loved it there, especially the small balcony where she'd sit and bark at passing birds. Anna started planting flowers in pots out there, calling it her mini garden. And for a while, life felt steady again. But as we settled into this new chapter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Grief has a way of changing people, and even though Anna seemed to be healing, there was a part of her I couldn't quite reach anymore. Life in the new apartment had started to settle into a rhythm, but there were still days when Anna seemed distant, trapped in her own thoughts. She would go through the motions. Classes, rehearsals, even our little rituals like taking Daisy for walks. But her laughter wasn't as frequent, her smile not as bright. I tried to be patient, to give her space when she needed it and comfort when she allowed it. It was during one of these quieter periods that my older brother, David, made his grand re-entry into my life. David and I had always been close growing up, despite the 5-year age gap. He was the kind of older brother who could make you feel invincible one moment and completely out of your depth the next. David was larger than life, charismatic, adventurous, and seemingly fearless. 5 years ago, he'd left the country to work abroad, bouncing from one city to another, chasing opportunities and experiences I could only dream of. His visits back home were rare, and our communication had dwindled to the occasional text or call. So when he announced out of the blue that he was coming to town and wanted to stay with us for a few days, I was thrilled. "David's coming?" Anna asked when I told her, her tone a mix of curiosity and something I couldn't quite place. "Yeah," I said, grinning. "Can you believe it? I haven't seen him in 5 years. He says he's got some wild stories to share. You're going to love him." She gave me a small smile but didn't say much after that. The day David arrived, it felt like a hurricane had blown through our quiet apartment. He showed up with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a beaming smile that hadn't changed since the last time I'd seen him. "Look at you," he said, pulling me into a bear hug the second I opened the door. "You've got a whole grown-up vibe going on now, huh? Apartment, girlfriend, dog. Who are you, and what have you done with my little brother?" "Still the same guy," I laughed, punching him lightly on the arm. "Come on in." David's energy was infectious, filling the space as he greeted Anna and immediately knelt down to pet Daisy, who, of course, fell in love with him instantly. "You must be Anna," he said, flashing his trademark grin. "I've heard a lot about you. It's great to finally meet the woman who's managed to put up with my brother for this long." Anna smiled politely, but there was a nervous edge to it. "It's nice to meet you too. I've heard a lot about your adventures." "Oh, don't get him started," I teased. "We'll be here all night." That evening, the three of us sat around the dining table, catching up on everything David had been up to. He told stories about hiking through the Andes, working odd jobs in Europe, and the time he narrowly avoided being pickpocketed in Bangkok. Anna listened quietly, nodding along but not saying much. "Hey," David said, turning to her after finishing a particularly wild story. "You've been awfully quiet. What about you? Got any crazy dance stories to share?" Anna shrugged, her smile tight. "Nothing as exciting as what you've been through." I could tell she wasn't in the mood for company, but David wasn't the type to pick up on subtle cues. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Well, that just means we've got to make some new memories while I'm here." Over the next few days, David's presence brought a mix of joy and tension into our lives. He had a way of dominating the room, his charisma both a gift and a curse. I loved having him around, Reconnecting with my brother after so long felt like rediscovering a piece of myself. But Anna seemed more withdrawn than ever. I caught her zoning out during conversations or slipping away to the bedroom earlier than usual. One night, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window. "Hey, support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference," I said, sitting down beside her. "Everything okay?" She nodded but didn't look at me. "Your brother's interesting," I laughed. "That's one way to put it. He's a lot, I know, but I haven't seen him in so long. Isn't it nice to have him here?" She hesitated, then forced a smile. "Yeah, it is. It's just a lot of energy to get used to." I chalked it up to her still grappling with her emotions after her uncle's passing. But there was something else, an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. I noticed little things. How she seemed flustered when David complimented her cooking. How she avoided eye contact with him during conversations. How she'd leave the room when the two of us were laughing over old memories. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured she was just tired, or maybe even a little overwhelmed by the whirlwind that was my brother. But looking back, I wonder if that was the first crack in our foundation. A small, barely noticeable fracture that would grow into something much larger. The days with David flew by in a blur of laughter, stories, and the kind of energy only my brother could bring. He had this uncanny ability to make every moment feel larger than life, and for a while it was like a refreshing breeze had swept through our apartment. But even as I basked in the joy of reconnecting with him, I couldn't ignore the subtle shifts in Anna's mood. She was polite, but distant, her usual warmth replaced by a quiet reserve that didn't sit right with me. I chalked it up to her needing time to adjust to having a guest, especially one as over-the-top as David, but I told myself it was temporary. Then, 2 nights before he was set to leave, David dropped a bombshell. We were sitting in the living room, Daisy curled up at his feet, the smell of takeout lingering in the air. David leaned back in his chair, that familiar glint of mischief in his eyes. "So," he began, drawing out the word like he was savoring a secret, "I've got some news." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh boy, should I be worried?" He laughed, shaking his head. "Nah, this is good news. Great news, actually. I've decided it's time to settle down a bit. Stop bouncing around so much." "Wait, really?" I said, leaning forward. "That's huge for you. Where are you thinking of settling?" David grinned, his gaze flicking between me and Anna. "Here, in this city. I've already been looking into jobs, and there are a few promising leads. If all goes well, I should be back for good in about a month." I was stunned, but in a good way. The idea of having my brother nearby after years of living halfway around the world was exciting. "That's incredible," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "It's going to be so great to have you around again." Anna, however, didn't share my enthusiasm. Her smile was faint, her response carefully measured. "Wow, that's a big change. Are you sure you're ready for that?" David chuckled. "Ready as I'll ever be. And hey, it's not like I'll be crashing here forever. I'll find my own place soon enough." I didn't notice it at the time, but Anna's hands tightened in her lap, her knuckles whitening as she nodded along. The next day, David packed up his things and said his goodbyes. I walked him out to his cab, our conversation full of plans for the future. "Don't be a stranger," he said, slapping me on the back before climbing into the car. "Wouldn't dream of it," I replied, waving as he drove off. When I went back inside, Anna was unusually quiet. She didn't say much for the rest of the day, and I figured she was just decompressing after having a guest in the apartment. But as the days turned into weeks, the distance between us only grew. First, it was small things. Anna started retreating to the bedroom earlier, leaving me to watch TV alone. Conversations that used to flow effortlessly felt stilted, like she was only half listening. And the laughter, the thing I'd always loved most about us, became a rare occurrence. I tried to bring it up one evening after dinner, hoping to clear the air. "Hey," I said, leaning against the counter as she washed the dishes. "You've been pretty quiet lately. Is everything okay?" She didn't look up, her focus fixed on the plate in her hands. "I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." You sure? Pressed. Because it feels like, I don't know, like something's bothering you. She finally turned to face me, her expression a mix of frustration and fatigue. It's nothing, really. I've just got a lot on my mind with school and rehearsals. I wanted to believe her, but something in her tone didn't sit right. Still, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Over the next few weeks, things didn't improve. Anna became more withdrawn, her mood swinging between irritability and indifference. Little things started to spark arguments. Who forgot to take out the trash, who left the bathroom light on, whether Daisy had been fed yet. I found myself walking on eggshells, trying to avoid setting her off. But no matter how hard I tried, it felt like we were drifting further apart. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Really wrong. This wasn't just stress or a rough patch. This was something deeper, something neither of us was willing to say out loud. I thought back to the day David announced he'd be moving to the city, replaying the scene in my mind. Anna's reaction had been subtle, almost imperceptible, but now it felt significant. Had something shifted that day? I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was imagining connections that didn't exist. But the doubt lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Because when cracks begin to form, they don't always start with a bang. Sometimes they're quiet, barely noticeable until the foundation begins to crumble. The days after David's visit turned into weeks, and the distance between Anna and me only seemed to grow. It wasn't any one thing that made me feel it. It was the accumulation of small, seemingly insignificant moments. The way she avoided my eyes during conversations. How her laugh felt forced, like a shadow of the joy I'd once known. The nights she went to bed before me, claiming she was too tired to talk, leaving me alone in the living room with Daisy curled up at my feet. First, I told myself it was just stress. She was juggling a lot. University, dance rehearsals, adjusting to life in her uncle's apartment. I tried to be understanding, to give her space, but the more I gave, the further away she seemed. Our arguments became more frequent. They started small, about who forgot to pick up milk or why the laundry hadn't been folded, but quickly spiraled into deeper frustrations. You never listen to me? She snapped one evening after I asked her if something was wrong. I'm trying to, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But you're not telling me anything. How am I supposed to fix this if I don't even know what's wrong? Her eyes flashed with irritation. Not everything needs to be fixed, okay? Sometimes I just need space. Space, I echoed, my frustration bubbling to the surface. Anna, you've had nothing but space these past few weeks. I'm just trying to be here for you. Maybe that's the problem, she muttered under her breath, and the words hit me like a punch to the gut. The tension in the apartment became unbearable. Even Daisy seemed to sense it, her usual energy replaced by a nervousness that mirrored my own. I couldn't focus at work, my mind constantly replaying our arguments, searching for where things had gone wrong. Finally, I reached a breaking point. I needed answers, and I couldn't get them from Anna. So, I decided to go to the only other people who might help, her parents. It was a Saturday afternoon when I drove to their house, my thoughts racing the entire way. I hadn't told Anna I was going. Part of me knew she wouldn't have approved, but I was desperate. Her parents had always been supportive, and I hoped they could give me some insight into what was happening. When I arrived, her dad greeted me at the door with a warm smile. Hey, there he is. Come on in. Her mom appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. What a nice surprise. How's Anna? How are you two settling into the apartment? I hesitated, the weight of my frustration and confusion threatening to spill over. That's actually why I'm here, I admitted. I need your advice. Things between Anna and me, they're not great right now. Their smiles faded, replaced by concern. They led me to the living room, where I sat on the couch, Daisy's absence suddenly feeling like a gaping hole. Start from the beginning, her mom said gently, her hands clasped in her lap. I told them everything, the arguments, the distance, the way Anna seemed to pull away no matter how hard I tried to reach her. I even mentioned David's visit and how things seemed to change after he announced his move. Her dad leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "That doesn't sound like the Anna I know," he said. "She's always been so open with you." "I know," I said, running a hand through my hair. "That's what makes this so hard. I feel like I don't even know her anymore." Her mom's expression was harder to read. She exchanged a glance with her husband before turning back to me. "You know, she's been through a lot this past year. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference," she said carefully. "Losing her uncle, moving into his apartment, it's a big adjustment. Maybe she just needs more time." "I've been giving her time," I said, my voice breaking. "But it's like the more space I give her, the more she pulls away." Her dad sighed, his face a mix of sympathy and helplessness. "Relationships aren't always easy, son. Sometimes you've got to weather the storm and trust that the other person will come back to you." I left their house feeling both comforted and frustrated. They meant well, but their advice didn't give me the clarity I was looking for. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something they weren't telling me. When I walked through the door, Anna was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up when she saw me, her expression unreadable. "Where were you?" she asked casually. "Just out," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. She nodded, turning her attention back to her phone. And just like that, the conversation was over. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence between us felt heavier than ever. I thought about her parents' words, about the Anna I used to know, and about the cracks in our relationship that seemed to be spreading faster than I could keep up with. Something was wrong. Something was missing. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just a storm to be weathered. This was the beginning of something I wasn't sure we could come back from. Anna's graduation was one of the proudest days of her life and mine. I stood in the crowd with her parents, clapping so hard my hands ached as she walked across the stage in her cap and gown. When they called her name, the beaming smile on her face made all the struggles of the past year seem worth it. Afterward, we celebrated with her favorite dinner at her parents' house. She laughed and joked, the stress of final exams and last-minute projects seemingly behind her. For the first time in months, things felt normal, like we were on solid ground again. Soon after, Anna landed a job in marketing, a position she'd worked hard to get. I was thrilled for her and proud of everything she'd accomplished. But her new role came with long hours and more responsibility than she'd ever had before. At first, the late nights didn't bother me. I knew she was trying to prove herself in a competitive field, and I wanted to be supportive. She'd send me videos from the office, showing me the stacks of paperwork she was tackling or giving me a quick tour of her cubicle. Sometimes, she'd video call me on her way home, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and pride as she talked about the day's challenges. When she said she was heading to her parents' house after work, I didn't think much of it. Anna was close with her family, and I figured she needed the occasional escape to decompress. She'd send me videos from their living room, her dad joking in the background or her mom fussing over her with snacks and tea. It wasn't ideal, but I trusted her. But as the months went by, the late nights became more frequent. It started gradually, 1 or 2 evenings a week turned into 3 or 4. She'd come home well past dinner, sometimes after I was already in bed. Her excuses always the same. Deadlines, meetings, last-minute presentations. "I'm just trying to make a good impression," she'd say when I brought it up. "You know how it is when you're new. I can't afford to slack off." I nodded, biting back my frustration. "I get that, but it feels like I barely see you anymore." She gave me a tired smile, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "It's just a phase. Things will slow down soon, I promise." I wanted to believe her, but the doubts started creeping in. One evening, after she called to say she'd be working late again, I found myself pacing the apartment, replaying our conversations in my head. Something about her tone didn't sit right. Daisy trotted over, her tail wagging as she nudged me with her nose. "What do you think, girl?" I asked, crouching down to scratch behind her ears. "Am I overthinking this?" She tilted her head, her big eyes full of innocence. I sighed. Maybe I was being paranoid. Anna had always been open with me, always gone out of her way to show me where she was and what she was doing. She'd earned my trust. but still the unease lingered. 6 months ago, the late nights reached a tipping point. Anna was staying at work even later than before, sometimes not coming home until midnight. On weekends, she'd claim she needed to catch up on projects or visit her parents unexpectedly. One Saturday evening, after she told me she'd be at her parents' house, I found myself scrolling through old photos of us on my phone. Pictures of our early days in the tiny 2-bedroom apartment, of Daisy as a puppy, of Anna laughing with her head thrown back, completely carefree. Where had that version of her gone? I couldn't take it anymore. The next day, I drove to her parents' house. I needed answers, and I hoped they could give me some insight into what was going on. Her mom greeted me at the door, surprised to see me but warm as always. "Well, this is a nice surprise," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "What brings you here?" I hesitated, unsure how to begin. "I just wanted to talk about Anna." Her dad appeared from the living room, his face immediately filled with concern. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" I explained the situation as best I could. The late nights, the growing distance, my worries about how much she was taking on. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I've tried talking to her, but she keeps brushing it off. I'm starting to feel like I don't even know her anymore." Her mom sighed, sitting down on the couch. "She's always been ambitious, even as a kid. When she sets her mind to something, she gives it everything she's got. Maybe she's just overwhelmed, trying to prove herself at work." Her dad nodded. "You know how she is. She doesn't like to let anyone down. She's probably just under a lot of pressure. Give her some time. She'll come around." I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that this was just a rough patch, that Anna would find her way back to me. But as I drove home that evening, the unease in my chest didn't go away. Because sometimes, even when everything looks fine on the surface, you can feel the cracks spreading beneath. About a month after my visit to Anna's parents, things hit a boiling point. It was a Friday evening, and Anna hadn't come home from work. She hadn't called, hadn't texted, just silence. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but as the hours dragged on, worry turned into frustration. When midnight came and went, I decided I couldn't sit around waiting anymore. I grabbed my keys, drove to her parents' house, and explained everything to them. Her mom and dad listened quietly as I told them about the missed calls, the growing distance, and the constant excuses about work. My voice cracked as I admitted how powerless I felt. Like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough to bring us back to what we once were. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "I've been thinking about proposing to her. Maybe if we take that next step, it'll help her see how serious I am about us, about building a future together. Maybe it'll remind her of what we're supposed to be." Her dad's face lit up like I just handed him the winning lottery ticket. "Finally," he exclaimed, clapping his hands together. "It's about time you made an honest woman out of her. You've been together long enough." But her mom's reaction was different. She leaned forward, her expression thoughtful and a little hesitant. "I'm not sure that's the right move right now," she said softly. Her dad frowned. "What are you talking about? It's perfect timing." Her mom shook her head. "Not if their relationship is already struggling. Adding an engagement into the mix won't fix anything. It might even make things worse. They need to work through these issues first on their own. The relationship should improve naturally, not because of a ring." I sat there, caught between her dad's excitement and her mom's cautious words. Deep down, I knew she had a point. Proposing might seem like a solution, but it wouldn't magically erase the cracks in our foundation. So I decided to wait, to give us more time to find our way back to each other. When I left their house that evening, I felt a strange mix of disappointment and determination. I wanted nothing more than to take that next step with Anna, but I knew it had to be for the right reasons, not as a desperate attempt to patch things up. Strangely, after that conversation with her parents, it was like Anna had been switched. Almost overnight, she stopped staying late at work and began to take more responsibility for our relationship. She'd come home earlier, cook dinner with me, and even started planning date nights again. Something we hadn't done in ages. "I've been thinking," she said one evening as we sat on the couch with Daisy snuggled between us. I want us to make more time for each other. I know I've been distant lately and I'm sorry. I just got so caught up in work and everything else. But you're what matters most to me." Her words felt like a balm on an open wound. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful, like we were finally on the same page again. A few weeks later, Anna and I had a short vacation planned. We decided to spend a few days at her parents' house, something we hadn't done in a while. The change of scenery was refreshing, and Anna seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. For 3 days, we ate home-cooked meals, played board games, support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference, and lounged around in the backyard while Daisy chased squirrels. Her dad kept bringing up little jokes about marriage, nudging me in the ribs and saying things like, "You're running out of excuses. Kid, when's the big day?" Anna would laugh it off, but I couldn't help wondering if she'd noticed the way my face flushed every time he mentioned it. On the 4th day, her dad suggested we go fishing. "Come on," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "It'll be just us guys. Let's see if you can catch something bigger than that puny bass you got last time." I laughed, rolling my eyes. "You'll see. This time, I'm taking home the trophy fish." Anna started to get up to join us, but then winced, clutching her stomach. "Ugh, I don't think I can go. My stomach's been killing me all morning," she said, sitting back down on the couch. Her mom fussed over her, bringing her a cup of tea and insisting she rest. I hesitated for a moment, glancing at Anna. "Are you sure you're okay?" She waved me off with a weak smile. "I'll be fine. You go. Have fun." So I went, not realizing how much that fishing trip would change everything. Because sometimes, the cracks in a relationship don't just spread. They shatter all at once, leaving you to pick up the pieces of a life you thought you knew. The fishing trip started out like any other. Anna's dad was in high spirits, cracking jokes as we loaded the gear into his truck. Her mom, ever the practical one, packed us sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, waving us off with a reminder to stay hydrated. "You boys have fun," she said, her smile warm. "And don't forget to bring back dinner." We laughed, promising to return with the catch of the day. The ride to the lake was filled with easy chatter, the kind that made me feel like I was truly part of their family. Her dad told stories about fishing trips from his youth, and we debated the best strategies for catching bass. About halfway to the lake, her dad suddenly smacked his forehead. "Ah, darn it, I forgot the bait." Her mom rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake, they'll bite without it. You've got lures, don't you?" "Lures aren't the same," he argued, glancing at me for support. "You need the real stuff to catch the big ones." I shrugged, trying to stay neutral. "It's up to you, but we're not in a rush." Her dad hesitated for a moment before pulling a U-turn. "We'll go back," he said decisively. "Won't take but a minute." When we pulled into the driveway, I offered to grab the bait while he stayed in the truck to double-check the rest of the gear. "Be right back," I said, hopping out and heading toward the house. The door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual. I stepped inside, the familiar smell of coffee and freshly baked bread still lingering from breakfast. And that's when I heard it. A muffled laugh, followed by a sound I couldn't quite place. My heart started pounding, a strange mix of confusion and dread washing over me. I followed the sound down the hall toward the living room, my footsteps slower now, almost hesitant. When I rounded the corner, the air seemed to leave my lungs all at once. There they were, Anna and my brother, David, naked, twisted together on the couch in a way that made it impossible to pretend this was anything other than what it was. They didn't notice me at first. Her hands were in his hair, his lips pressed to her neck, and the world seemed to tilt beneath me. "Are you kidding me?" The words tore out of me before I even realized I was shouting. They froze, their heads snapping toward me with identical expressions of horror. "Wait, it's not," Anna started, scrambling to cover herself, but I didn't let her finish. I turned on David, my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. You're my brother?" I spat, the betrayal burning in my chest. "How could you do this?" He stood, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. But I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw before I could stop myself, the impact reverberating up my arm. David stumbled back, clutching his face, his eyes wide with shock. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice raw. "Get out of this house!" He didn't argue. Grabbing his clothes, he bolted past me, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The front door slammed shut behind him, leaving the house in an oppressive silence. I turned back to Anna, who was now clutching a blanket around herself, her face streaked with tears. "I can explain," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Explain." I laughed bitterly, my voice breaking. "Explain what, Anna? That you've been sneaking around with my brother? That you've been lying to me for God knows how long?" Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to feel pity. All I could see was the image of them together, the betrayal etched into my mind like a brand. The sound of the truck door slamming outside snapped me out of my daze. Her dad was coming inside, oblivious to the storm that had just erupted. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I grabbed the bait from the counter and stormed past him without a word, my chest heaving with anger and disbelief. "Hey, what's going on?" he called after me, but I didn't answer. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. I sat in the living room, my fists clenched, my mind reeling from what I had just witnessed. Anna sat across from me on the couch, still clutching the blanket around her, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I had so many questions, and none of them felt like they would lead to answers that I could live with. "We're going to talk about this," I said, my voice low and cold. "All of it. And I want the truth, Anna. No more lies, no more excuses. Just the truth." She nodded hesitantly, her lip trembling as she tried to compose herself. "How long?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Almost a year," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. "A year," I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been cheating on me with my brother for a year? And you didn't think I deserved to know?" Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. It just did. I didn't know how to stop it." "Stop it," I shot back, disbelief and anger flooding my veins. "How about never starting it in the first place? How about being honest with me instead of sneaking around with him?" She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "You didn't want to hurt me?" I stood up, pacing the room. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just hurt me, Anna. You destroyed everything we built together. You betrayed me in the worst possible way. With my own brother." I stopped pacing, turning to face her again. "And your parents," I said, my voice heavy with suspicion. "Did they know?" Her reaction said it all. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in guilt. "They knew, didn't they?" I pressed, my voice rising again. "That's why your mom was so against me proposing. That's why they kept telling me to give you more time, to let things settle. They were covering for you this whole time, weren't they?" She nodded, her hands trembling as she wiped at her tears. "They didn't want to tell you," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "They thought it would make things worse. They were trying to protect me." "Protect you?" I interrupted, my anger boiling over. "What about me, Anna? What about the person you were supposed to love? They let me walk around like an idiot, thinking I was the problem, while they knew you were sneaking around with my brother behind my back." The weight of it all hit me at once. The lies, the betrayal, the fact that the people I had trusted had been complicit in keeping me in the dark. I sank into the armchair, burying my face in my hands as the reality of the situation settled over me like a crushing weight. "I trusted you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I trusted them, and this is what I get in return. A year of lies." Anna didn't respond. She just sat there. "Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference." Sobbing into her hands, the sound filling the room like an echo of everything that had been broken between us. I looked up at her, my heart aching with a mix of anger and sadness. "Why, Anna? Why did you do this? Were you bored? Were you unhappy? What was it?" She shook her head, struggling to find the words. I don't know, she said finally. I was overwhelmed, and David, he made me feel noticed. It's not an excuse, I know it's not, but that's the truth. I felt sick. Noticed, I repeated bitterly. You needed him to feel noticed? After everything I've done for you, everything we've been through, that wasn't enough for you. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, stopping her. You know what? Don't bother. I don't think I can hear another word right now. The room fell silent except for her quiet sobs. I sat there, staring at the floor, trying to piece together the shattered remains of what I thought my life was. I had come to her parents for advice, for guidance, and they had sent me home with empty reassurances, knowing full well what was happening behind my back. I had fought for a relationship that had already been destroyed, and now I was left to pick up the pieces on my own. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was the end of everything I thought I knew. I sat there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a boulder I couldn't move. Anna's sobs filled the air, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about David. It was the people I trusted most, the ones I thought were my family, choosing to protect a lie over me. I stood up, my voice hollow as I said, I need some time to think. Without waiting for her response, I walked out the door, leaving behind the life I thought I had, and the pieces I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to put back together. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference.